In this video, I'm going to be talking about why this game is so perfect for introducing newcomers into the wargaming hobby, and why I really like how they do their starter sets for their factions. Now, before we talk about the game, I want to break down the largest pain points I have had in the past by introducing hobby of miniature wargaming to my friends. First is the cost. Some of the most popular wargames require hundreds of dollars to get a fully playable army, and sometimes it even goes up to 1,000 if you want it to be competitively viable. Now, I've personally dropped a few hundred on my Thousand Suns and Emperor Shogun armies, so coming up to a friend and asking them, hey man, do you want to drop a couple $100s for some tiny dudes? It's a bit of a hard ask. Secondly, say they do miraculously say yes and end up buying some units to get started, setting aside a few hours of their day for weeks, maybe months at a time, just to be able to play a game with me, doesn't exactly sound compelling, especially that we have other options for hobbies like video games or Magic the Gathering, which they can instantly pick up and play. Wargaming just takes too much of a time investment to really just get into. Lastly, let's say they do miraculously finish up that starter army, now it's time to play, and they realize that the rules aren't fun. Wargaming rules aren't exactly straightforward sometimes, especially to newcomers. They take some time to get used to over the span of multiple games, even for the shorter ones. Now, there are more pain points that I skipped over for sure, but these three are the ones that I think really hit the nail for most people. So I'd like to introduce this game. Now, it may not answer all these problems, but the way they've structured and market their games really remedies these problems pretty well for me personally, and I think this might be the best answer to those problems I've seen in wargaming. This is A Song of Ice and Fire, and I'd like to talk about how good their starter sets are at easing in not only newcomers to their game, but also newcomers to wargaming as a whole. I'll be using the Bolton starter set mainly as an example, but a lot of these points I'll be making apply to their other starter sets as well. One of these boxes give a fully playable army, all the core rules, measuring tools, terrain, and even cards you need to play. The ruler, I think, definitely beats carrying around a tape measure, and it goes far enough that it applies to all measurements required in the game. Next is the generous amount of tokens used to indicate the different status effects, game mechanics, and victory point tracking. These really make the tracking of these different game systems that you're still trying to learn a lot more manageable. And honestly, during my trial game with Salty, it was really easy to miss different status effects, especially that the Boltons give a lot of panic tokens, and being able to see which units were panicked without having to remember them really was helpful for us. Next, we have the cardboard terrain. Now, admittedly, I wasn't impressed by this at first. I mean, in the end of the day, it's just cardboard, unlike what you see in most big box releases from other companies with full-on plastic terrain, but I had a change of heart about this when I playtested the game and saw how different terrain had different effects when a unit is standing on it, and how players take turns setting in pieces of terrain of their choice on the game board, depending on what the game mode is. I then realized how much I like this system of deploying the terrain with the opponent, sort of treating it as an additional strategic element before game deployment. And not to mention that these are super easy to carry, especially for Salty and I, where we travel a lot and we're going to be introducing this game to our friends, and having them be a flat piece of cardboard is definitely a lot easier to carry for us. And I imagine it will also be easy for people who pick up the starter set and just want to carry this box to their local game store to get some games in. All in all, it's pretty handy that every player is going to have a copy of these paperback contents that you'll be using in every game of Song. Now, this is a little bit of a tangent. I mentioned earlier that the starter sets come with a full army. Now, this isn't exactly true because the standard game of A Song of Ice and Fire is 40 points, and some of the starter sets do come with 40-point armies, but they're really more geared to play at a 30-point level. So if you really want to play a 40-point game, you're going to have to pick up maybe a box or two. However, the 30-point level is a pretty good starting point to learn the game. This was the points level Salty and I were playing, and she's never played a miniature war game before, and it was a lot more manageable, definitely, without those extra 10 points of units. In my experience, and these starter sets give you enough variety for you to swap in and out units at that 30-point mark, giving you some different playstyles to play with, really showcasing the faction. So you're really given a good taste test for what the faction can do based on the different characters you're going to be fielding. So for this example, we have the Bolton starter set, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of variety here. I've got 4 combat units, meaning the units you'll see on the battlefield, and some characters I can either use as non-combat units, which is the unique mechanic of Song of Ice and Fire that can give special buffs, or you can use them as attachments for those combat units, further buffing that unit. Now, speaking of playing the game, all the rules are pretty simple and streamlined. My partner and I were able to quickly understand the flow of the game in just a few turns. The rulebook comes with the starter set itself if you want to check it out, but a more updated version for the current season is available on the War Council app, which is this free app that you can use to keep track of a lot of useful things like units you currently have in your collection, your army rules, stats and list, and the latest changes in the game. Now, I won't be diving into the ins and outs of the game here in this video. I highly recommend checking out the aforementioned app, or if you're a visual learner, there's a really good battle report by Miniac that's pretty well produced and explains the flow of the game pretty well. But as someone like myself who has very little experience with different war games, and for Salty who doesn't really play war games, the rules were pretty fun and well explained. So that pretty much covers the hurdle of learning, but what about the building and painting? So Song's miniatures are pre-built. Now this comes with some pros and cons for some people, especially if you are either like the building aspect or painted sub-assembly. This definitely could be an issue for you. But for me, I think it's a really good time saver. And speaking of time saver, the minis don't really need to be painted as well, since they are color-coded towards the faction they are a part of, meaning that if you were to buy, let's say, the Bolton starter set and some Bolton units like the Flamemen, they are going to be in the same brown color that distinguishes the faction from any other faction in the game. I ended up painting the units anyway, but this is a great way of eliminating that hurdle for people who aren't really interested in the modeling or painting aspect of the hobby and they just want to get straight into play. So theoretically, if you were to read the rules beforehand, decided to pick up the starter set in your local game store, and then just open the box, you could definitely hammer out a game if you were to schedule one with someone who can demo the game with you on that same day you purchase the game. Bonus point is that they keep pretty well in the starters. Like, the box is pretty sturdy and you get this plastic clamshell packaging where they sort of rest. You can reuse the plastic packaging when you're done to safely keep the models on the shelf. Lastly, let's address my first gripe, which is cost. It is the most prohibitive part of the hobby, and I gotta say, Song of Ice and Fire is a lot easier on the wallet in comparison to other games I picked up, especially Warhammer. The starter set, I picked it up on sale for $80 or 4,500 pesos after conversion and shipping, which is a pretty good deal having this much stuff and it being an all-in-one starting point for the faction in the game. Now, since I bought the starter set and recorded this video, I've collected 2 other factions, which is the Lannisters and the Baratheons, and I have expanded these factions by getting additional boxes or hero boxes, which is like sort of the character boxes. I gotta say, it's a lot easier to maintain this game coming from Warhammer. I mean, the characters themselves come in like a box bundle, which is great because they usually come with other characters you're more likely to be using in the army, unlike, let's say, Games Workshop, where characters are sold piecemeal and at a really high premium. And I gotta say, the additional units are pretty cheap as well, coming in at 40 bucks. So, to top this video off, every Song starter set gives you an all-in-one entry point into this wonderful game. They really ease you into learning the game by providing you with helpful tokens to indicate status effects and mechanics that you need to keep track of, down to even the victory points you earned for the round. The models included come in a pretty good variety and are already pre-built and pre-color coded, eliminating the need to build and making painting up to preference. And finally, they come in a pretty reasonably priced box. So what do you think? Would you be willing to take the dive into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, or is it just not your vibe? For me, I've been getting into this game a little heavily, I think, and I'm looking to collect most, if not all, of the starter sets for the factions in the future. Okay, this is a little bit of a bonus for my pepinos out there. I usually get my starter sets from Amazon. They do free shipping. I got my Boltons from there. They have some pretty good sales sometimes because the usual standard price in the Philippines is around $120, $140 or 5,500 to 6,600 depending on which local game store you're getting it from. But if you're anywhere in Luzon, I recommend checking out these guys called Miniature Palenque. They have the best prices. They sell the starter sets for about 5,500, and every unit box, including characters, are sold at 1,800, or which is around like $35. But that's it for now. My name is Jessica, and I talk about my miniature hobby every day.